Hello, everyone. My name is Teresa Manning, and I am the Policy Director at the National Association of Scholars and also the President of the Virginia affiliate of the National Association of Scholars. Today is Friday, August 22nd, and I am again joined by Jared Gould, who is the Editor-in-Chief of the online publication at NAS called Minding the Campus, but also Minding the World, since you are now accepting submissions from different countries. And we haven't met in a few weeks because of erratic summer schedules, so it's nice to see you again, Jared. And for today's lineup, Jared's going to be doing most of the talking because he selected three very interesting articles from his publication. We'll start with the first, which concerns experiences Jared has had with the healthcare system. And the reason I'd like to lead with this is that there are some similarities between the medical system and the education system, primarily that they are run with third-party payers. In the case of medical care, we have insurance. In the case of higher education, we have lenders. This results in sort of a warping of both the prices and actually the product, but there are even more intricacies and issues for that. So I think it'll make an interesting lead off. But there were also articles on civilization, Western civilization and culture, and the liberal arts, the role of studying the humanities, and whether the focus on ROI, return on investment for higher education degrees, or the focus on business is actually a wise course of action. We see that from the Education Secretary, Linda McMahon, and actually at the National Association of Scholars, we like to be a voice for the humanities and the liberal arts. Third was an article about diversity ideology, also known as equity, as DEI, as affirmative action, as multiculturalism. Pick your euphemism, and how this has lowered standards for every activity. It's not just an injustice, it has more broader societal implications. And I picked one topic which concerns the resolution agreements the Trump administration is reaching with various universities, including Columbia and Brown. Those agreements include provisions sometimes of having a Title VI coordinator, which is to say yet another bureaucrat on campus to be not the sex police, and as is the case for Title IX, but the discrimination police, which is equally misguided and wrongheaded. So I'd like to describe that a little bit, but just to get us started, Jared, if you could brief listeners on the article, the really interesting article you wrote, I think it went up just today or maybe yesterday, about your medical bill.
Yeah, so it went up yesterday. It was my top of mind column. It's a column that I get out every Thursday to our subscribers. And I just went with a bit of a different direction this week than I typically do and tried to speak about higher education and how it relates to this experience with this medical bill. To give people background on this, back in January, my fiance underwent a operation that is actually medically necessary, but insurance kept telling us that it wasn't medically necessary. And so we had to cough up the money out of pocket, which was $10,000 for the operation itself, which had to be paid up front in order to get it done. We were also required to stay in DC for a certain period of time because you have to be close to the hospital. So there's another easy $2,000 for the Airbnb that we stayed at. And then I think $1,000 and possibly more for the private room that we stayed in overnight the day of the operation, just so that she could get her proper care. Considering all these expenses, I thought to myself that we're done. We're good to go. I don't have to worry about this. But 7 months later, and just this last Tuesday, we receive another bill for the sum of a couple of $1,000, the hospital fees. And they're charging us from, everything from blankets to the bed to just all kinds of ridiculous things that you would think I had covered in my initial payments or insurance would have taken care of.
So,
But
Jared, if I could just interrupt. So you paid back in January, you were billed for the operation, and you thought you had settled up. You thought you had taking care of all the expenses, so this was like a surprise invoice.
Yeah, it's a surprise bill, which I do mention in the article is actually the number one reason Americans go bankrupt every year because our health insurance system in this country is so wackadoo that people are constantly going bankrupt over medical expenses because insurance companies don't want to pay out, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway,
Mhm,
the reason that I related this to higher education is because we not too long ago saw Luigi Mangione assassinate the healthcare CEO, Brian Thompson. Um, and it was over situation like mine, just constant medical debt, insurance not covering his bills. Um, and the point that I tried to make in this essay is that is really two things. One, I believe that there's a cohort of people who kind of look at young people and say, oh, their grievances aren't real. They're just kind of imagining them. And then with that, you have an education system that, one isn't prioritizing or giving them the tools necessary to properly fight against this system. Instead, it kind of enables their radicalism, so to
mm,
speak.
mm,
And so, on one hand, I'm saying that yes, young people are actually facing incredible issues that arguably previous generations in this country did not have to face. That's extreme rising healthcare costs, cost of living costs. Everything has gone exponentially up except wages. And you couple this with an environment where college graduates are entering an economy where they're not able to find jobs very easily,
mhm.
or their jobs are being taken or replaced by AI. This is an environment that stokes radicalism, and it
Mhm.
especially stokes radicalism when our education systems are kind of fanning the flames of different ideologies and not really providing them with the tools that they need to live as virtuous citizens and actually fight for reform in a way that's, nonviolent.
Yeah. Okay, so if I can make a few comments because you've made some interesting points. First of all, this generational issue that older generation is sort of ready to dismiss the complaints of the younger generation as just being spoiled or snowflakes and not realizing that there are real differences between generations and what each generation faced in terms of education and housing costs. And at the same time, young people not being prepared to handle those hardships because they've not been instructed in any real skill. Those are great points. My reaction, I have a number of them. The first is the lamentation on my part that there should be what we call generational warfare. So much of the political left and the enemies of man and God want to pit human beings against each other. It's the divide and conquer strategy. So we see this, for example, with abortion, pitting moms against their own children, in divorce, pitting spouses against each other. And of course, in our neo racism, pitting one ethnic group against another. So we have to be sad and also aware that this is a very destructive tendency, that the ideal is when we have a society that can look out for each other. Natural bonds, such as the bonds between parents and children, are fortified, between spouses are fortified. And even though you might have Chinatown and the Amish and different neighborhoods based on ethnicity, there shouldn't be tension or hostility. And to beware when people want to pit everyone against each other, they're playing us. We shouldn't fall for this. So that's my first remark. The second remark, though, is how tragic it is that an older generation would look at a younger generation and have this attitude like, toughen up, cupcake. We had it difficult too. I mean, everybody can say that I had my bag of rocks to carry, but I'm talking about an attitude. This is so alien, so foreign, that you would have an older generation that would not care about the younger generation, not at least listen to some of their hardships, and an older generation that is out for itself and not
Yeah.
watching out for the future of their people and the future of their country. On this point, I mean, the rampant divorce rate is one example of this tragic development that adults are actually putting their interests before even the interests of their own children. So that's one thing, is that this is seems to me an oddity. How did this happen? It almost seems, I can't say it's unprecedented, but it doesn't seem historical that the adults would not be looking out for the young people. One last comment, however, is that the post-war period where the baby boomers enjoyed access to education, access to housing, the GI Bill, the housing explosion, that might have been a real anomaly. That might have been a post-war boom that was atypical even for the United States. That particular generation, of course, many of them had served in the military, so there was a lot of goodwill toward them. But that type of largesse by the government, healthy outlook toward young people and young families, that might have been atypical. That's something to keep in mind. That said, if we are going to compare that period with the present, I think it's undeniable that in the present, all the pressures, the downward pressures are on labor and on compensation for labor, and all the access to things like housing and education has been compromised. But there's a lot to consider here. So let me
Yeah.
stop and see what you think.
Yeah, well, so, talking about the intergenerational warfare that is happening in our country right now is an important topic. I have not been able to investigate this to such an extent that I would feel comfortable making assertions about why this is, but I will say that at least one of the things that I think drives the older generation, and by the way, it's not all of them, but it's a general pattern of people in older generations who say, well, these students are protesting and they're doing it over nothing. They've never had it so good. And I think the older generation says that because they see things like iPhones in our hands and we all have laptops
Yes.
and
Yes.
we have certain cheap luxuries
Yes.
that they didn't have.
Yes.
And those things are true, but it's really difficult for them to see how, because the necessities of life have become so extraordinarily expensive, that it's almost impossible for us to have the same standard of living. For example, we can't buy a 5-bedroom house and it costs half of our yearly salary. It's now 400 times our salary and it stretches, almost half of every paycheck that we receive. And so
Yes.
it's impossible for them to recognize that because they haven't lived with it. And then they also see the technology boon, and in their minds, they've created a world that's actually better for the next generation. But what we have to live with is exponential uprise in cost of basic necessities, which make everything else more difficult.
Yes, it's so interesting when you juxtapose it like that, because it's almost like a trap or a trick, that whatever powers that be said to the young people, here are your iPhones, here are your computers, here are your Starbucks coffees, here's your pornography, your abortion, your hedonism. Go have a good time. But if you try to make a life, if you try to marry and start a family and buy a home, good luck, because we're taking away with our right hand, what the different things, the more important things, and giving you creature comforts with our left. I mean, if there were some evil genius mind in charge of things, it
Yeah.
almost looks like that was the calculation.
Well, I just think that there's a cognitive disconnect between what some people in the older generation are actually responsible for and any kind of personal responsibility for it. What I mean is I had a long conversation with my dad, who is a boomer, about that situation where the mother was arrested because her 10-year-old kid was walking down the street. I don't Do you remember this?
Yes.
Okay. he started telling me that, well, when I was 10 years old, I was walking miles by myself.
Right.
And I
Right.
said I said, "Yeah, I know." I said, "So this is really crazy that somebody's getting arrested." And his comment back is, "Well, kids these days are just so pampered and weak." And I'm like, "But your generation created the conditions for that. Like, you voted for those laws, you voted for those politicians to create such an environment that the 10-year-old kid can't walk a mile to the dollar store,
Mhm.
and then you have the audacity to say that our generation is weaker, but you created the conditions for that weakness to become a thing."
Well, you might be on shaky ground there in really pinpointing culpability because whatever culture or country we have now is a result of such a variety of factors and forces. It's hard to single out any one person or one generation. But my comment, again, getting back to the mentality or the attitude, is shouldn't an older person lament that kids can't walk in their own neighborhood? What has happened to this country that the nation they had, where they grew up, where they could walk miles and miles on their own when they were 10 years of age, is no more. And
Yeah,
the country for their grandchildren is so different. I think that's my main remark is
yeah,
this mentality that, oh, they're pampered or parents are indulgent or police have to do this. Shouldn't the first reaction be regret that what happened to our country that it's so different from the one that I enjoyed and I grew up in? And of course, I think Trump tapped into some of that,
yeah,
although perhaps it was self-interest as well, like, a lot of Americans look around and they see a country they don't recognize, and for their own sake, they don't like it. But I wish, and I think it would be much more healthy if people, and this is why it was sort of important that a few years back, European leaders didn't have children. You know, you looked across the board of the European countries and they were single and childless. Well, this can't be a good thing that you're not invested in the future of your country and yet you are leading it. But what you're saying is almost even worse is that you do have these children, you have cause to be invested in the country's future. And still you have sort of this hostility or this knee jerk, they're pampered or they're snowflakes. And of
yeah,
course, it should be said that all of these conveniences, computers, televisions, iPhones, in a real sense, they are a form of abandonment. I mean, this is an interesting twist that spoiled kids are actually abandoned kids. Nobody is doing the hard work of saying no,
yeah,
of saying, let's go out and rake the leaves or let's go out and do being spoiled, being indulged with creature comforts. It is another form of abandonment, which is why I think you see rampant divorce plus all the computers and the iPhones
yeah.
across the board. It's just an abandonment of the younger generation, and it's a tough reality that we have to ask, what are we becoming as a people? What are Americans that this is how we view our grandchildren and our country?
Yeah. Well, I also wanted to just comment though that a lot of times everybody picks on the boomers.
Yes.
It's also everybody picks on the boomers, but the Gen X was largely the generation that had the helicopter parenting problem. And I am honestly a symptom of that generation because my mother wanted to bubble wrap me everywhere I went. And ultimately I was able to get away from those things, and she wasn't totally helicopter parent after a while, but there are other people that I know who grew up under such helicopter parenting, and Jonathan Haidt has pointed this out in his work.
Yes.
The
Yes.
I think sociologist who says that um, this helicopter parenting is what created such a weak generation. Kids that are so anxious and nervous and don't know how
Yes.
to act or or do anything in accordance of their own will. They have to constantly be handheld. That's a symptom of helicopter parenting. I don't think boomers were helicopter parents, but Gen X was. The situation with, I think, both of those generations combined is another side of this issue. And I talk about this a little bit in the piece is if I say something like, my medical expenses are so insanely big, the immediate reaction is, well, just get a higher paying job. Why don't you work harder?
Mm, mm.
And I'm like, the
That's
real
not
the
really.
the real question is why is the healthcare cost so expensive when in your generation it wasn't this way? It was
Or
not.
housing. I mean,
Or
the other
housing.
thing is housing. We have these, interest, there's an upward spiral, but I'm sorry, I didn't mean
Yeah.
to interrupt. Go ahead.
Well, no, there's I we see this a lot, and our politics are so divided that people cannot think about two things at the same time. So if you say something like, it's insane how much, like, the profit margins of health insurance companies,
Mhm.
you are automatically seen by right wingers as a socialist.
Right, right,
And then if you say, well, no, they're totally able to have those profit margins and our society should do nothing about it, you should just work harder, then you're a downright, capitalist and whatever the term is. And so
right.
there's no in between. And
Mhm,
what I'm arguing in this piece is that in a in the richest country in the world, we should have some kind of resemblance of something to show for it. What do we as citizens living in this country have to show for it? I should be able to
mhm.
point to first world infrastructure. I should be able to point to first world healthcare that says, "Oh, hey, we care about caring for patients. We don't just see you as somebody to bring into the ER and make sure that we get you off the table for the next client," which
Yeah,
is often what it feels like.
right. Yeah, no, it's a great point. It's sort of a threshold question that should be asked. What kind of country should we be? What does it mean to be a first world country? What are our priorities? And I mean, this could get into, the Catholic Church has a teaching on the family wage where compensation levels are always geared toward how can someone support a family. And all of these issues, whether it's access to housing or to medical care, would be seen through the lens of how to support people having families again for the next generation, because the health of a country is determined by the orientation toward the future and toward its children. And that is really what seems to be missing. There's that saying that the prize for the pie eating contest is more pie. So it's like the first world country. What's the benefit of being in a first world? Oh, well, you should go and make more money. Just get more money and work harder until your entire existence is consumed by working hours, get another car, another house. It's There isn't a sense of what is all of this for, as I say, a threshold question of purpose. Now, I have to ask though, Jared, and this might be a little bit far afield, but for me, post COVID, I am so down on the medical system. I can hardly call it a medical system anymore. Just in the news today, I saw that I think it was called Mercy Care Medical Administration was going to be forced by the HHS, by the Trump administration, to compensate those employees who refused to get the jab during COVID and who were terminated or who were fined. Payments were deducted from their paychecks. And I hate to even get started on this, but I'll make the basic point that forcing or pressuring anyone to do anything for their health, whether it's an injection or a pill or any lifestyle, any type of coercion is not medical care. Medical care is individualized patient care where the patient always has the final say in what course of treatment, including the right to decline. So once public authorities get into the territory of bribing, people making payments so people will do something to affect their bodily integrity. This is so far from real medical practice as to be laughable, laugh or cry. But my question for you, Jared, is given what has happened with COVID and how it eroded so much of the credibility of the medical system, and I like to point out every third woman I know has had breast cancer. What? This is a
Yeah.
huge fail. This is a huge fail. Why should I listen to anything these medical personnel say? Where is the prevention of cancer?
Yeah.
We're told we're so lucky that we have radiation, chemotherapy, and mammograms. No, no, no. Where is the prevention so that people are not diagnosed in the first instance? So, my question for you, Jared, is weren't you apprehensive? Aren't you taking a second look at everything that the so-called healthcare system is offering, given this record of failure?
Yeah, I know this is definitely a little veering off from what the lineup is, but this is a really interesting segue because I have a congenital heart defect. I've written about this at length, not only on Minding the Campus, but I did a huge report for Speech First on the issue of ideological indoctrination taking over medical schools.
Mm.
To your point about why people are so unhealthy, a lot of that does come down to the American diet. This is why people wanted RFK to be part of the Trump administration. And we actually Mining the Campus just published a piece called Med Schools Risk Funding Cuts Within a Year for Lack of Nutrition Courses, RFK
Mm.
Jr. I think I think it's actually by the end of this month, medical schools have to start incorporating nutrition training. Part of the issue is today medical schools are totally being indoctrinated by the DEI push and the woke push,
Yes.
which I'll bring up in a second. But for decades now, they've been heavily funded by pharmaceutical industries to the point where, and there's several physicians that you can go listen to and talk about this. It's to the point where the only thing that you really learn in medical school is what do I need to prescribe my patient? What pills do I have to give?
Right.
It's not about actually caring for somebody. I
Follow the money.
all of the money. I used to say when I ran for office several years ago, I said the reason why politicians don't never fix anything is because if they fixed it, they wouldn't have anything to run on. And this is kind of the same logic that I think truly applies to med school and just to the whole healthcare industry. Now, I'm a cynical person, and I know that a lot of people probably won't agree with that, but I do think that if our institutions like medical schools actually started healing people, they would have no more patients. You know, if you're healthy, why do you need to come to the hospital? I am most convinced about this as well because of the whole weight inclusivity problem that that is now permeating almost all of these med schools. Now, I brought this up in my Speech First report, which people could go read. I'll drop it in the link to this video. But Minding the Campus has just published on this as well. Claire Harrington, who is one of our writing interns at Minding the Campus, wrote that at med schools, weight loss is out, weight inclusivity is in.
Mhm.
Under the banner of fat positivity and body positivity, med schools are now teaching that you can't call obesity what it is, and that is it's a bad circumstance of health. You don't want to be obese because it leads to so many other issues like diabetes.
Yes, but the focus on weight to the extent that it's a cosmetic concern. Of course, health and beauty overlap, but the focus should always be getting to a healthy weight. And
Yeah,
I do think the whole diet mentality was misguided. You know, we're going to starve ourselves for 14 days so you fit into your bikini and then you're going to go,
yeah.
this is not toward health. So, but obviously fat
Well,
positivity, I mean, obviously this is
oh,
ridiculous.
it's completely bogus. I mean, to be honest though, it's part of the same trend of just all the lies that have been permeating our sciences for decades. I mean,
Yes.
what was it? In the early 90s to the 2000s, you had the false food pyramid, which I've written about for Minding the Campus, by the way. It was under some kind of like Live Not by Lies article that I'd written about a year ago. And it was just like everything that we were told by the government to be healthy, the food pyramid, was the exact opposite of what you would do to be healthy. Instead of telling you to eat proteins, lower your carbohydrate intake, they were like, "No, let's up our sugar intake, let's up our carbohydrate. Let's
Carbs.
let's start the day with a bowl of Fruit Loops instead of eggs." That's craziness. It's just complete
Yes,
craziness.
and also no regard for the quality of the food. I mean, that has to
Yeah,
we have to ask what we are feeding animals, what are we putting in the soil, what pesticides are being used, glyphosate, all that good stuff. Now, to your point that a medical system would go out of business, people will still get in car accidents, fall out of trees. I think there would be plenty for a real medical system to handle. And even sometimes, so for example, some people think that illness is largely cyclical, like a flu season. You still would want medical personnel or even naturopaths to advise what herbs and what healthy medications could help with symptoms. But certainly right now, and this is the whole RFK Jr. phenomenon, we have a sick system. It's like to keep them paying customers, they have to stay sick. And we are seeing a lot of chronic conditions. But I don't want to press or pry about your situation, but surgery, even surgery right now would really give me pause rather, because these are dramatic interventions. The more dramatic the intervention, more it should really be a last resort, that
yeah.
all other more benign and non-invasive approaches should be tried. And that's one of the reasons I thought I would ask. I mean, my trust for them is so low. And this is not about individual nurses and individual doctors, some of whom are still well intentioned. But I think COVID and the ridiculous coercion to get this injection should have made the scales fall for everyone. And
Yeah.
medical professionals who are still in that system and are not readjusting to ask what are they doing, they're either part of the solution or part of the problem. So
Yeah.
I don't know, did you have that pause before?
Well, yeah, certainly. The biggest thing that gives me pause about any kind of treatment now, and this is a good segue into Rob Jenkins' piece, which I had sent you,
Yes,
called "The Damage from DEI Will Last a Generation. Eradicating It is Still Essential."
yes.
That, um, and I had written previously about this as well, saying my surgeon might be a diversity hire,
Of course.
and that's like totally true. And in fact, even in the age of post affirmative action, even when we have a Supreme Court that says, hey, it's unconstitutionally legal to basically be admitting students on the basis of their race, schools are still doing it, and medical schools are doing it.
Yes.
The Spectator had a piece on this. The College Fix has been writing about this. Mining the Campus has said multiple things about this. In order to achieve a false sense of diversity, lowering the standards for everyone to get in. Why do we want that to be? It blows my mind that anybody says, "Hey, this is a good thing," because these low qualified doctors are going to become doctors, and they're going to be helping people. They're going to be working in hospitals. They're going to probably become some surgeons, and they're simply not qualified to do
Yeah.
it. Like, they didn't get there because of merit. They got there because the standards were lowered so aggressively in order to achieve a false sense of diversity, which is, racial diversity, which should not be the goal of an institution. Goal of an institution should be intellectual diversity and pushing up the ladder of those who are smartest. Uh,
Ex with excellence as the goal.
yeah,
Yes.
excellence is the goal. So yes, I mean, I have pause pretty much now for everything, but especially healthcare.
Mhm.
Because when you look at the aggressive tack off on standards now, and just the people that they let into medical schools is completely insane.
Yeah, well, maybe the worse it gets, the better it gets. I mean, maybe if you see the implosion and COVID was the start, it will die on the vine. Now, one irony is I think a two-tiered system or a double standard for those who can afford to get out of the system versus those who cannot will develop. So this is ironic because I think the whole diversity ideology, which is just sort of a socialist ideology, is trying to be egalitarian and provide everything for everyone, regardless of merit and industry. What will happen is people with the means to get out of a mediocre system will.
Yeah.
And of course, I guess this is what happens with black markets. There becomes a black market on providing healing. And I guess we're seeing a lot, I wouldn't call the alternative schools, but for example, Hillsdale and Patrick Henry and the University of Dallas, these are universities and colleges which are rejecting the mediocrity of political correctness and are trying to uphold higher standards. Well, the shakeout is going to be that serious thinkers are going to end up at those institutions, and the mainstream ones are going to increasingly be seen as unserious. And I don't see how else this can happen. It's a little bit like, well, we say there's the expression white flight, but I think that's actually not the full story. If you had lower income people or government housing moving into neighborhoods, people would leave. That's the natural thing. So I think you end up with systems that empty out, and either black markets or alternative systems develop. One reason I say that's not the full story is that some people theorize that the bringing in of government housing is a way to bust up neighborhoods that are getting powerful politically. So it wasn't
Right.
so much a racial thing as a political thing, but that's kind of a sidebar.
Well, this is another good segue into the other piece in the lineup, which is Ian Oxneved's piece
Yes, yes.
on the liberal arts, which, by the way, he totally nailed. But what I would say is that what you can gather from Ian's piece is kind of a solution to everything that you and I have talked about, which is a liberal arts education. If somebody were to actually have a rigorous, well taught liberal arts education, what we'd be producing is a generation of virtuous citizens, people who go out of their way to help their fellow citizens. And, just generally, I guess the best way to describe it again is just live virtuously. When you have
Hmm.
virtuous citizens, you don't have landlords that squeeze every last dollar of their tenants. When
Right.
you have virtuous citizens, you have people who go into something like medicine because they care for patients and actually want to heal people
Yeah.
and don't just see it as a money-making glorified restaurant basically where, "Hey, let's just get this person on the bed here, give them a few shots, get them out, and now the next patient."
Yes. Well, two things. Even for virtuous people, there's always the risk of vice. It's almost like we can seem Pollyannish when talking about virtue, but it might help to say people at least have to be facing that direction, have to be aiming for the classical virtues, not that they won't fall on their face from time to time. I mean, sin is real, vice is real, but everybody should be facing the direction of trying to lead a virtuous life. And the second thing is, I think neighborhoods are important here because there's this globalism tendency that, taking care of the kids in Africa while not taking care of your own children. This is upside down. Really can start, that's the beauty of it, right anywhere, wherever you find yourself, as the corny expression is, bloom where you are planted. You should be taking care of those around you. So it does have to start with family life, the integrity of the home, to your neighborhood, to your city. It's interesting that you ran for office. Was that for mayor, Jared?
Yeah,
Yes. Yay.
it was one of the dumbest decisions I've made in my life because I was only 24 and like was running against a Navy SEAL. In my right mind, I don't know why I thought I could possibly win. The irony is that the Navy SEAL didn't win. It was the guy who had ran the city into a deficit for the last 12 years that ended up winning, which was the most surprising factor in that campaign. But back to this issue, yes, I think it's actually worth just reading here the last paragraph that Ian writes in his piece. He says, simply put, the liberal arts allow a society to understand itself and the individuals within it to communicate as a whole. This leads to self awareness, self respect, and self preservation. It is what allows civilizations to function. So long live the liberal arts.
Hmm.
I don't think that it could be stated better as to why these things are valuable.
Hmm.
You have to have a shared history, you have to have common language, you have to have shared stories in order to have a civilization, um, and part of what you get out of that when you have a shared community is people who are virtuous. It creates an environment where virtuism can flourish, and we would have a better society for it.
Hmm.
So,
Yes, this is in response to the sort of crass commercialization of education where everyone thinks school is just about getting a job.
yeah,
And without denigrating the need for people to find real work and good work and work that suits their talents and temperament, education is more than that. And ultimately, not just the cultivation of the mind, but of the soul, which is why religious groups ran their own schools. They saw the
mhm,
overlap between the mind and the soul. So all of this commercialization sort of cuts off or deracinates or takes out the heart and the soul of what education really is. And of course, as Ian pointed out, and you mentioned stories, well, the gospel speaks in terms of parables. So we know that stories speak to us, have a certain staying power. And why does anybody get up in the morning?
yeah,
I mean, this is sort of a basic thing. After a while, to get the bigger house or the third car, is that really going to get you up? People do need to have a sense of purpose, why they are doing anything, and that's what the humanities address.
yeah. Um, this is a good part to close and loop back to what we were talking about originally with my piece before you update us. Is I speak about the ROI problem in that top of mind column, and I think that's worth reading to close us out here. I said, to be sure, there is irony in all of this worth noting. The very education system that fuels students' radicalization, turning them to
Mm,
violence to solve problems, is the same one that stokes the culture, creating the conditions for their anger. Higher education increasingly reduces learning to return on investment. When students are taught to value knowledge primarily for its financial payoff, it's no surprise that many graduates become professionals and administrators who apply that same logic to their work. In healthcare, that's patients become revenue streams. In education, students become customers. And in countless other fields, profit and measurable returns take precedent. This mindset doesn't end at graduation, but permeates society, fueling frustration, inequality, and cynicism.
mhm. Yes, and even the moralistic sort of do-gooder mentality is largely a materialistic one. It's that everyone should have the same amount, right? So it all tends to be very reductionist. There's a poverty there, an intellectual and a spiritual poverty. And it is unfortunate. It isn't really the Western civilization way, where there is a recognition of excellence and hierarchies and an emphasis on the individual finding where that individual can be excellent and contribute. So,
Mhm.
um, this is all sort of an anti-Western and tragic development, but maybe this generation, this younger generation that is disillusioned and seeing through some of this. In my social media feeds, I get a lot of homesteading stuff. I see some back to the land movements, back
Yeah.
to the basics movements, and I think all of those are very good. So we can end on that hopeful note. I do want to mention, though, just because I said at the beginning, to make the point about the Trump administration, for the most part, I think we're pleased with what the president is doing. It's not perfect. We won't get into all of that, but I'm very glad that there have been initiatives against these universities, whether it's for their DEI ideology or other things. But one very wrongheaded move is to have, as part of these settlements with these universities, more campus bureaucrats. And so I want to sound a note of caution, sound the alarm on that, that to the extent the Trump administration is requiring schools to hire more coordinators, even for seemingly benign purposes like non-discrimination. This is a bad idea. All bureaucrats ultimately become self-interested, watch out for their jobs, begin creating fires so that then they can put them out and tell us how valuable they are. Also, it duplicates what the university council's office already is supposed to be doing. And I'd like to suggest more of an inspection model. We have health and safety inspections for restaurants, for farms, something like that, an audit system. We could even tap the IRS, would be much better than contributing to or creating more administrative bloat on campus. So, just a word of caution for listeners on that point. But great, Jared. So, I think we got through all of our material. Thank you for doing such an excellent job with Minding the Campus and such a variety of topics. And I will say
Yeah.
it's not superficial. I mean, the essays there are getting to a lot of the root of the problem, asking the fundamental sort of premise questions. Who are we? Why do we do things? What is the priority of our economic system, of our education system? These are heavy hitting questions that I am so appreciative of because a lot of discourse can be very shallow. You know,
Yeah.
our politics, it's driven by the election cycle, who's going to get elected, and those short term solutions are not at all. It's a whole other discussion that actually civilization depends on sacrifice in the short term for benefit in the long term. That's really what a civilization is. And to the extent our political discourse is always driven by the short term election,
Yeah.
that might explain the ruins in which we find ourselves.
Yeah, potentially. I will say that I try to make Minding the Campus articles as rigorous as what we would demand out of higher ed. It's difficult to do that, but I do my best, and we still have, there have been a much wider variety of topics lately that everybody needs to check out. And upcoming is actually a few essays that I think will interest a lot of people. One of those will be from Scott Turner, our colleague, who will write on the COVID vaccine as a critique on the New York Times, who says that there's no reason to be concerned. Of course, Scott's going to lay out that there's a lot of issue to be concerned. The next up two will be hopefully a nice expose on what exactly the Trump administration wants. We need to figure that out. What does he want out of higher education? And
Mm,
one of our writers will be taking that on to try to see if we can get answers.
yeah. No, it's always just consistently excellent content. So keep up the good work and have a great Labor Day weekend. That's the next weekend, the end of summer. And hopefully we can regroup the Friday after that.
Yeah, sure thing.
Okay. Thank you, Jared. And thanks to everyone listening. Bye. Bye.